Good morning, Minnesota DFLers, and welcome to the DFL Daily. Richard Carlbaum, your chair of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party. Great to be with you each and every morning at 10:45, making sure that you have the message, the action, and the tools to take one more concrete step toward winning big in the 2026 midterm election. I want to start off by saying thank you to CD6. I went to their dinner last night, their unity dinner last night. A bunch of the auditor candidates spoke. We got to celebrate Doug Chapin's endorsement. He's already working hard door knocking. And really just want to say thank you to Chantel, Dell, Wayne, all the leadership up in CD6. We are ready to beat Tom Emmer, and people are showing up in droves to do just that. Looking ahead to tomorrow, I'm going to be at the CD5 convention in St. Louis Park and the CD2 convention in Burnsville. There's a bunch of coffee and conversations happening, SD35 at 9 a.m. tomorrow. There's a neighborhood network coffee chat at Lunds and Byerly's in Apple Valley at 9:30, and in Plymouth, there's the Plymouth area DFLs doing a coffee and conversation at 10 a.m. You can find all these events on dfl.org/events. All right, let's get into it. We close out this week looking at something that should alarm every single person in Minnesota and across the country. There is a coordinated, escalating effort by Republicans and the Trump administration to criminalize peaceful protest and silence working people. Democracy is about giving working people a voice, and right now that voice is under attack. So let's take a look at what's happening. Look no further than what the FCC just did to ABC. Free speech advocates sounded the alarm after the Federal Communications Commission challenged ABC's broadcast licenses. Why? Well, the timing's simple. A source with knowledge of the matter said it got fast-tracked after ABC late-night host Jimmy Kimmel made a controversial joke about the First Lady. The lone Democrat on the FCC panel called it what it was. Quote, the most egregious action this FCC has taken in violation of the First Amendment to date. That is the federal government threatening a broadcaster for a joke. If that doesn't send a chill down your spine, I don't know what will. These actions have real effects on public opinion. A Washington Post ABC News poll conducted last fall found that 57% of Americans believe Donald Trump is not committed to protecting freedom of speech. 61% say he is not committed to protecting the freedom of the press. That's not a fringe view. That's a majority of the country looking at what's happening and calling it what it is. And let's be clear about what's actually at stake here. These freedoms aren't Democratic talking points. They're enshrined in the First Amendment of our Constitution. So when you're talking to your neighbors, your coworkers, your family members who are still on the fence, remind them of that. This isn't a partisan issue. This is about the founding document of our democracy and whether we're going to defend it. He's going after the First Amendment just like they went after the Fourth Amendment here in Minnesota, right? This is what they're doing to American citizens. They're stretching the Constitution as far as they possibly can to see when the American people will just let them do what they want. That's why a majority of Americans across partisan lines take issue with these attacks on our fundamental rights. Republicans are taking freedoms away from you and your family, and they are doing it systematically. The Trump administration has indicated that its full political will is dedicated to cracking down on dissent through aggressive, politically directed prosecution and intimidation, echoing the political repression of the darkest moments in American history. We're talking about a national security presidential memorandum that attempts to label political opponents as domestic terrorists. Does that sound familiar? That's what Alex Preddy was the morning he was shot by federal agents. They called him a domestic terrorist. They're inventing legal frameworks to punish people for speaking up. Several Republican members of Congress have also aggressively targeted nonprofits, with Senator Ted Cruz attempting to empower the Department of Justice to target progressive nonprofits through RICO charges. These are organizations that register voters, feed families, and help workers know their rights. Republicans want them gone. And there are bills in Congress right now proposing criminal penalties for protesters on interstate highways, protests near pipelines, and for protesters who block traffic. The message is clear. If you take to the streets, we want to make you a criminal. Here in Minnesota, we have lived this. We watched peaceful observers and community members get tear gassed, arrested, threatened, and even killed by ICE. Attempts to observe federal immigration raids were met with surveillance and use of force, including beatings and the use of chemical irritants and flashbangs, including against families with children. Journalists were arrested after covering a protest against ICE. But here's what they didn't count on. Minnesotans didn't back down. We stood up for our First Amendment. Hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans took action through peaceful protests in support of their neighbors, and it's working. That is what democracy looks like. That is what working people do when the system tries to grind them down. Donald Trump and the billionaire class do whatever they think will help them, and we get left behind. But here's what gives me real hope. As the current administration continues to attack the social fabric of the United States, it is the continued peaceful resistance of Americans that will turn the tide against Democratic backsliding. DFL elected officials here in Minnesota are not standing still. They have been pushing for stronger oversight of federal enforcement, clear protections for sensitive locations like schools and childcare centers, and legal safeguards for workers and families who are harmed. The ACLU of Minnesota is litigating to protect protesters. The state has filed sweeping lawsuits against ICE tactics, and community networks from mutual aid groups to legal observer training programs have turned grief into organized power. That is what we are fighting for, not just the right to protest, the right to exist, the right to show up at your children's school, go to work, drive down your street without fear of a federal agent deciding your face looks like it doesn't belong in that neighborhood. They want you to be afraid. They want you to be silent. They want you to believe that this is inevitable. It isn't. We organize, show up, and hold every Republican who enabled this accountable at every level in every election from here to November. So here's our call to action today. Donald Trump's attacks on the First Amendment aren't hypothetical. They're happening right now. When free speech is silenced, misinformation fills the void. Republicans already know this. Conservative content creators and GOP party accounts are dominating the online conversation. They're flooding your social media feeds with their narrative while our voices get drowned out. That's exactly why we built DFL Amplify. We need real Minnesotans, people just like you, sharing the truth with their friends, families, and neighbors online. Authenticity beats a propaganda machine every single time. So don't let them control the story. Join DFL Amplify. You can go to dfl.org/amplify and fight back with your voice today. We will regularly provide you with content that you can go on your social media and post, truthful content where you can influence and help educate your own personal social media networks. Thank you, everybody, for a great week. Happy Friday. We'll see you at some conventions this weekend, and we'll be back here Monday morning at 10:45. We got 179 days until the November 3rd midterm election. Let's go win this thing.